Going today on Locked On Rockies. Let's talk Rockies Cubs with Locked On Cubs.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans and Cubs fans. As we know, there's a lot of those Cubs fans in Colorado. Always show up to Coors Field in droves. We got a great show for you today, a crossover podcast. Andrew Belleson from the Locked On Cubs podcast joins us today. Andrew, thank you so much for your time.
Paul, it's great to be with you. I'm embarrassed to say I have never been to Coors Field, and I shouldn't even admit that, but I have never heard one negative thing about it, and it's definitely on the list.
Interesting you say that. I figured it's one that a lot of people get to, a lot of people like to visit, but I hadn't been to Wrigley until I moved. Actually, I went one time before I moved, but then the Rockies came through town and played Chicago, so I got to watch the Rockies and Cubs. The weird thing, and it's kind of funny, we're talking today as well about left field or outfielders playing differently. That's when Carlos Gonzalez had his brief stint with the Cubs, was when I got to see the Rockies play the Cubs in Chicago. And that's what we're talking today. We're talking Rockies, Cubs, new faces in new places, two teams that have completely turned things around in terms of who is on the staff, and these competitive windows are in much, and the faces of those are in a much different place. But before we get started, want to thank you for making Locked On Rockies or Locked On Cubs your first listen of the day. If you haven't, go on to either Locked On Rockies or Locked On Cubs on YouTube and subscribe to the YouTube channels. We're live on Locked On Rockies right now. We got the live chat. Maybe we'll take a couple of questions here from the chat as well as we go through today. But of course, nothing else to talk about today other than Rockies and Cubs. And I wanted to start, Andrew, first with Kris Bryant. I know it's we went through it last year. Everyone asks me about it when I did crossovers last year. Are you kind of in the same mindset of Kris Bryant, where it's the trade has happened, it's been long enough, he's on the Rockies, he's not a Cub? Do you feel kind of the same way that Kris Bryant does, where the Cubs are just another team and we don't need to do the press conference every time?
I do. And maybe that's not the most popular opinion here in Chicago because of what he meant. I mean, obviously what they accomplished when he and the rest of that core was here is something that they hadn't done for 108 years. So it's a big deal, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they needed to clean house. They needed new faces. The turnover was inevitable. You alluded to the window of contention that these teams have now. Man, they just seem to slam shut so much quicker than they used to, don't they?
I mean, with the Rockies especially, I mean, it was, oh, wow, hey, look at this infield, look at this pitching staff, and now they're not on the team anymore.
It's crazy. I mean, you've got 2, 3, 4 years. Sustainability so difficult, I feel like. But yes, to answer your question, we love KB in Chicago. You guys love him in Colorado already. You're going to love him even more. Great guy, great family man, great player, just natural ability, those beautiful blue eyes. I mean, come on, like
Right.
What's not to love? That smile. But yeah, it's time to move on. I mean, I liken it to our football team, the Bears. Haven't won a Super Bowl since '85, and we're still talking about that like it was in February. So yeah, turn the page. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's something Rockies fans, I think, have had to do, and it's been this season. Really, this has been kind of the final chapter closed. It's unfortunate. The offseason, I think, was frustrating for a lot of people, but at least for me, after the trade deadline and the lack of the moves the Rockies made last year, I kind of already was embracing. I didn't think John Gray was going to leave. I thought the Rockies were going to get that deal done. But Trevor Story, I was bracing for that and kind of knew, especially with the way his comments at the end of the season. But it's kind of tough. I mean, for Cubs fans, I mean, it's a World Series, and for us Rockies fans, it's probably the best competitive team that has ever been fielded, since at least the Blake Street Bombers and the lucky team of 07. But this was the team that you felt like they had pitchers, they had offense, they had defense.
Well, let me ask you this about the Kris Bryant thing. I mean, no pun intended, out of left field, but you didn't see that coming, did you?
No, to be totally honest, I thought the Rockies were going to be involved. I thought the Rockies were going to come up short, and then the deal that they offered to Chris Bryant was just going to be significantly less than whoever was going to sign Chris Bryant. But the Rockies were facing the first moment where they didn't have a superstar on their team. I mean, before Chris Bryant was coming into this team, you were looking at the roster and saying, I mean, at that point, Trevor Story hadn't officially signed with the Red Sox or anything yet. So technically that could have been there, but your big main star player is probably Ramon Marquez, with Ryan McMahon being your stud defender, but he doesn't have the same pizzazz yet as as Trevor Story did, who comes up and was hitting home runs all the time and making flashy plays at short. So I didn't expect it, but this was the Rockies signaling that they wanted to move on. That this is the team. This is the next chapter of Rockies baseball. This is the team that they want to go and move forward with, and it's going to be led by Chris Bryant. And with Chris Bryant, a lot of people I think might just see it as like the money thing, but there's a reason you sign on to play at a place 8 years and commit to going to a place like Colorado. I mean, Chris Bryant could have went anywhere. Anybody in the league would have taken Chris Bryant.
Yeah, no question about it. And I love, too, we saw that a little bit here, and I'm sure we'll touch on this with the Seiya Suzuki signing shortly after the lockout. He came to Chicago with his family or with his wife and made sure that before he signed on the dotted line, that this was going to be the right fit for him. He had suitors all over the league. Money, the casual fan, and we're guilty of it too, think that players of that caliber just chase the money. And of course, you only have this amount of time to make as much as you can, because then you can't play anymore. You and I could sit here and talk about this for 60 years, God willing, but
Right.
You can't do that on the field, right?
Right.
But to see what goes into it, and knowing Chris Bryant, they made sure that Denver was going to be home. And I know it's close to home, Vegas, right? Of home, but
Right.
the Denver was going to be the home they needed it to be for their family too. I mean, there's so much more than just the money. And I love that. That's what I'm talking about. I mean, you guys, you got a good one there, and he's so much fun to watch play the game on top of it all.
Yeah, and it's you bring in not only you lose Trevor Story, you lose Nolan Arenado, and you lose John Gray. You're big vets. You obviously have Charlie Blackmon still, who is, I would say, a Mr. Rocky. I mean, up there, it's Todd Helton and Charlie Blackmon, honestly, and they've played forever in Colorado, always been a stalwart, and Chuck's such a valued presence there. But to bring in a World Series champion, MVP, to come into your locker room, to come around some really more interesting pieces than people give him credit for. Ryan McMahon and Brendan Rodgers are more interesting than people I think are considering, and especially coming in to beef up that outfield with a young platoon of outfielders that can really benefit from working with someone like Chris Bryant. I think it's a great move, and it's paid off. He hasn't hit the long ball yet, but he's gotten a hit in every single game so far. And I just think it was important to commit to Rockies fans to say, hey, there's a lot that we need to still do, but we still wanted to go out and make a splash in free agency and show players, the league, that, hey, the Colorado Rockies are going to go out and spend money now. They didn't do that in the last competitive window, and Bill Schmidt has, the one big difference we can say between Bridich and Bill Schmidt is Bill Schmidt went out in his first offseason and spent money. He brought in more free agents than the Rockies have seen in a long time, and extending the contracts of certain players like Antonio Senzatella and CJ Cron. I mean, CJ Cron being one of the rare snags that the Rockies did get. But I wanted to actually talk a little bit more about Suzuki and just kind of about the state of this Cubs team and a little bit about last night's game. But before we do that, got to tell you about some of the great people that help make this show possible. And one of those people, or I guess it's a lot of people because it's a company, but it's Built Bar. Why don't you replace that canning bar, that snack habit that you know that you have, with something a little bit better for you? I know I'm guilty of it too. I love me a candy bar. I love a good sweet snack. Well, here's the deal, folks. You can get a protein bar covered in 100% real chocolate. Yes, 100% real chocolate, all delicious flavors too. And they're all at Built Bar. Built Bars are low calorie, high protein, and they have so many delicious flavors for you to check out at built.com. I can't even list them all, to be totally honest. And the best part, they have new, unique flavors being added all the time. And when you go to built.com, you can see the macros charts, and you'll see that they're high protein, low calorie, high fiber, and low carb. Most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And like I said, all covered in 100% real chocolate. So why not improve that snacking habit? And why not save a little money when you do so? When you go to built.com, you can use the promo code LOCK15 and you're going to get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. 15% off at built.com when you use the promo code LOCKed15. We're crossing over with Locked On Cubs today. And so you kind of hit the nail on the head. I was going to ask you why Chicago for Suzuki, but I think that quality of life is so important for players, especially when for Suzuki to come over and come to a whole new country, a whole new place, and a whole new style of baseball. I'm just curious, is there anything else that the Cubs kind of have going now for that they're building for their future, what their plan is for kind of this season and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, back to the Suzuki thing real quick. They did a really cool piece here in Chicago after he signed on kind of the whole detail and how the Cubs courted him and how they rolled out the red carpet, which I thought was neat because we don't always get to see that side of it as
Right.
fans, right? When you're courting a big star like that, especially one, from a different league in a different country, like you said. But the city was important to him, and then also the fact that they didn't press him. They weren't all over him pre-lockout, and they gave him the space to make a decision. Because you're right. I mean, this is a life-altering change for a player like that, right? New country, new team, new league. I mean, culture shock city. There's a lot that goes into that I think, hell, I don't think about it all the time, right? Yeah, and like you were touching on with the Rockies, I think the Cubs, the fact that they were so busy, not that they made, I mean, the Stroman deal before the lockout was huge. Suzuki after was huge. And there was a lot of, moves that kind of flew under the radar. The waiver claim of Wade Miley from the Reds back in November, a lot of veteran bullpen arms they brought in after the lockout. Very busy couple, 3 weeks of spring training, right? It was crazy because it was so condensed. And like you were talking about with Colorado, I think similar boat for the Cubs is when Carter Hawkins came in to work with Jed Hoyer as the general manager in October, it was, man, they're showing a commitment to winning. Because, I mean, regardless of the fact of whether you think the core should have been dealt last year or not, and it was the right move. I mean, they needed to clean house. It was time that window shut so fast, like we said. Everyone's kind of thinking here as Cubs fans, well, are they going to commit themselves, or is this going to be Tank City this year? God forbid, And that's not the route they went. So they clearly, showed that they were going to bring in talent, spend some money, and hope for the best. I mean, are they ready to compete this year? I mean, as an eternal optimist Cub fan, I'd like to say yes, maybe not. But the mix of guys is definitely, I think, better than most expected. And they're showing that the arrow's pointing the right way.
And I think, again, the similarities between the Cubs and the Rockies are kind of insane because everything you said, you could just replace it with the Rockies, and that's basically it. I mean, not a lot of people expected the Rockies to take down the Dodgers in that opening series. They do go on the road, and they do take a couple of games. Last night's game was a little bit, not the cleanest game, but it's April baseball. But there's a reason. And my whole thing going through the offseason leading up to the Chris Bryant signing and the other moves they made, the Rockies, again, making a trade for longtime player Raimel Tapia, sending him to Toronto to get to Grichuk. And he's made a huge impact. I mean, saved the game already. And so it was as hard as it is to kind of swallow that. I think as Cubs fans, you can kind of at least take solace in the fact that you lost your core, but at least the Cubs made some moves to bring things in. When the Rockies, at the end of the day, losing Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, and John Gray, get one draft pick from John Gray and Trevor Story because they didn't offer Gray the qualifying offer, and then they just have the Nolan deal. So you basically lose John Gray and Trevor Story, who I mean, there were tons of teams. I thought last year at the deadline, the package of a good starting pitcher with Trevor Story was going to be the enticing deal for some team to go in. I didn't think one of them was being traded. I thought it was going to be a package deal and the Rockies could get the haul that they're looking for both those players, but then they didn't do anything. So, I'm happy for the Rockies moves, but we still can't sit here as Rockies fans and be completely blind at the fact that the farm system isn't in the same place. They have some pieces here, but they still, if they're truly going to be draft and develop, I really hope these top picks are going to develop and draft, because the rest of the farms, we have some good top prospects, but once you start going down, it's kind of just like,
Well, that's what eases the pain, Paul. I think because it hurts, to see your faves get dealt last year, your Biases, your Rizzos, your KBs, et cetera, right on down the list. But then the haul that they got back prospect wise that you're now talking about, these are the top 25 guys in the organization. You see this guy in Double A now, this guy in Single A, Pete Crow Armstrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, you see this the haul that came back, and now you kind of reap those benefits, and it eases that pain from last year. You say, wow, hats off to Jed Hoyer last year. He did a hell of a job retooling this farm system that was completely depleted after they traded away some pieces in 16, 17, 18, winning a World Series and trying to get to another one. So, yeah, to see those young studs come back now, and you never know how they're going to pan out, but it's nice to have some beef down there for sure.
So who is the core of the Cubs these days? Who are they leaning on this year? Is Suzuki going to is he supposed to be the leader, or is he supposed to kind of come in and help complement? Who are the Cubs turning to this year to be the people they can count on to play almost every day, and you're hoping get a couple hits or have an impact on just about every game?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, you got your guy in KB, right? Among a
Right.
couple others, maybe.
Mhm.
I would say, Suzuki for sure. I think, everyone still wonders how he's going to acclimate to the major league game. Clearly, his approach fits the major league style, that swing, very powerful, drives the ball. But you never know. It's a big adjustment, right? It's only been a week and a half. I love him. I mean, I'm his
Right.
biggest fan. I
He's
hope,
already hit what,
he
like
is.
3, 4 home runs, something like that?
Yes, I
Yeah.
mean, just crazy start. Just goes about his business the right way. Wilson Contreras, I mean, he's essentially the team vet on that offensive side now, but his name's been floating around out there, trade rumors since, right before spring training in terms of teams that need catching help. He's in the last year of his deal. They don't have an extension in place, which just chaps my saddle region beyond belief. I love
Right.
the guy. And then on the pitching side, you got a Kyle Hendricks. He's the lone vet over there and still can get things done at 32 years old. And you brought in a guy like Marcus Stroman, who's been around the block, not here, but elsewhere. So it is a nice mix of vets and otherwise. And I think the exciting part is, obviously we don't know where they're headed come deadline time, buyers or sellers. You hope for the best, but it's nice to start seeing some of these young faces that they got back work their way towards the major leagues because that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Devin in the live chat does ask, how good is Suzuki in the field? He was a little shaky last night there, Coors. I mean, there was some interest, but again, it's April. We're not even 10 games into the season, but I am curious. I know that when I heard of Suzuki, I've heard a lot about the offense. I haven't heard a ton about the defense, so I am just curious about the other side of the ball.
Well, and the ironic thing about that is I haven't seen enough of him play to give you a fair answer. I'll be honest
Mhm.
with you. But right field at Wrigley Field is one of the toughest right fields to play in all of baseball. You play a lot of day games. The sun is always an issue. It's a wind tunnel for sure. Um, right field at Wrigley is not tough. And I was going to ask you this. I have written down in my notes here. I love the snap judgments early in the season of any baseball season. I'm guilty of it too, but the way the things unrolled with the lockout and the condensed spring training, I mean, you're right. You nailed it. You're going to see some weird stuff for a few more weeks than you might normally do, right?
Yeah, I think you have to take that into consideration. I'm hoping, and again, another prime example. I'm hoping Kyle Freeland can be innings 2 through 5 yesterday, other than getting just that little lack of control and just basically getting. He didn't give up anything hard. It was just
Yeah.
single here, misplay there, and just that timing. I mean, I know the Rockies turned 5 double plays last night, which was great, sure, but we still saw Jose Iglesias spike one in the dirt to CJ Cron. There's just a couple of small things that I think you're going to see get better. I think teams are going to start, especially when you have a lot of new faces like the Cubs or the Rockies. Once they get more of those games under their belt, they are really going to be able to start communicating and doing things and getting familiar with fields, especially again in Suzuki's case. He's playing in a new ballpark, every other week at this point, and especially, and same if you're coming over from, the American League into the National League and vice versa, all that
Mhm.
tough stuff. Yeah, I think, and on top of the lockout, we had the COVID season, and then we had the not COVID, but there was still a lot of COVID stuff, so we still were kind of there. There really hasn't been a full off season, normal off season, and nearly for 3 baseball seasons
Yeah.
at this point. And I think we're really starting to see the effects of that. On the opposite flip of that, leave Clayton Kershaw in the game. Come on now. What are we doing here? I mean, we got to. I mean, that's what I get it. I really do get it. But 6 outs away.
I'm so glad you went there. Getting back to Devin's point real quick, Suzuki, in terms of his defensive WAR ratings in Japan, very, very high, top of the league. Now, how that translates here again to a tough place like Wrigley, we'll see. But very good defensively in terms of, because you're right, nobody talks about that. They just talk about the stick.
Right.
I was taking some notes for a couple shows next week, and the Kershaw thing, man, blows my mind. I don't care about the condensed spring. I don't care if you're not stretched. I don't care about your forearm injury. I'm with you, man. You are talking about literally the golden unicorn, and you 6 outs away,
and you're Clayton Kershaw.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and I don't know. I don't want, this is me. I don't know if this is in poor taste. I don't want it to sound like, but like at this point, like skip the start if you're worried about, if like your next start, if you're worried about the health, I don't know, maybe I'm kind of crazy, but do that if you push yourself while you're building up. Wouldn't that might be kind of a way that you can kind of see where your limit is and then work through that? Better to know that now than later type of thing. And if you're dealing again, we're not the biggest Dodger fans over here, but we're out there. I tuned in to watch Clayton Kershaw. It would have been great for baseball. His first start, Clayton Kershaw re-signs with the Dodgers, and he comes out and throws a perfect game for this team that's supposed to be the team of teams. I mean, if you're an MLB promoter and both of us have worked in baseball in other ways, you're dying for that to happen.
Yes. So he was at 80 pitches through 6, correct?
80 pitches through 7.
Through 7. I'm sorry, through 7. So he's humming along. I mean, you can't put it any other way. And I as PO'd as I am for him, and he is inside. He was so PC about it with what he said.
Mm-hmm.
Which is good. You don't want to stir the pot in April. But Dave Roberts has a history of this. Remember the Ross Stripling game a few years back?
Mm-hmm.
How about Rich Hill? I get it. I get in theory, I get it. But I don't get it.
You're also the Dodgers. Like, you're supposed to be able to, like, if you're supposed to have the depth, you're supposed to be the team. You're supposed to, I mean, you just had an opportunity to, I mean, at that point, I know Kershaw's playoff impact will always come back and get him, but I mean, who's arguing with Kershaw at least top 3 all time at that point, if not the best pitcher we've ever seen, if he adds that perfect game onto that mantle he has. And I mean, it's a head scratcher.
I understand that it's early in the year, but don't you at least send him out there for the 8th? He could feasibly get through the 8th and 9th in like 15 more pitches and come away with 95 pitches. So yeah, it's probably 20 more than we wanted him to throw. But hey, sit down for a turn or whatever. Let him see how the 8th goes. No, I mean.
Yeah. What if he skips a start in April? What on really at the end of the day, like I feel like we're going to see the Dodgers have Kershaw skip starts at some point this year after he doesn't throw a near perfect game, just to be. Why wouldn't you if you have an opportunity in depth? But if you want to get in on some of the action today, the Rockies and the Cubs matching up, why don't you head over to our friends at BetOnline, because betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports info. I'm sure if they had a future bet of betting on a perfect game, I don't know if that exists, but that would have, if it does exist, they probably have it at betonline.net. And you can find all of the latest sports development, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. Big betting weekend in Denver here. We got the Rockies and the Cubs meeting up, and of course the Nuggets heading into the playoffs to take on the Warriors. So why not try to get in on the fun and a little bit of the action? I enjoy a little live betting myself when I can do it. But you can head to the website today and use that mobile device, learn about those trends, get in on the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Andrew, let's just focus a little bit more on the series at hand, and kind of maybe I do want to go big picture. Uh, this early in the season, what is your thoughts about the Cubs as it stands so far? They take down the Rockies last night, and then I'm same in the Rockies, maybe a little more wins, or a little more successful this early in the season than people might think. What are your thoughts on the Cubs on April 15th?
Very, very intrigued. Very intrigued. The issue last year offensively with this club was strikeouts, almost 1,600 as a team. I mean, that's atrocious. Let's be honest. And they have done, in a very small sample size, a really good job of cutting that number down. You said last night's game was ugly. It was. You're right. It was sloppy. But I think they had 2 strikeouts as a team. I'm basing my judgments off of that. Now, a win's a win, obviously. They played that first series against the Brewers at home very well, took 2 out of 3. But putting the ball in play, getting on base, cutting down on strikeouts, it to me means the world. And they have players now in the lineup, in the Nick Madrigals and the Nico Horners and the Suzukis, who are not big strikeout guys, bat on ball kind of guys. Suzuki with a lot more power than the other 2, obviously, but to try to combat that. And it's just so much better of an approach. I know, last year, a lot of people tuned out after the core was dealt, but it was an ugly finish for the Cubs playing ugly baseball. So in terms of the first 10 days of this season, I love it.
Yeah, and another example of just, to replace the word Cubs to just put in the Rockies. The Rockies have changed their approach on offense and gotten some. Connor Joe has been an absolute delight for this team, and his approach at the top of the order has been awesome. I mean, talk about someone who doesn't strike out that as much. He is someone that will take pitches, and when he does strike out, it's 3-1. It's a 3-ball count. It's a 2-ball count. He extends at bats, and that leads in. There are just so many more interesting faces in this lineup that hit for contact. There's also some power bats in there to replace the overall thing. But the new look offense has worked out, except what we've seen in the past couple of games. The Rockies are stranded runners all over the place. I believe they left 12 on last night, I believe, with multiple opportunities. And that's the biggest frustration I've had for the Rockies. The starters have been good. Kyle Freeland hasn't been as good as we've hoped for, but the bullpen's been great for the Rockies. The biggest question mark of the team, the bullpen has been great, but the offense we're getting back into those bad habits last year of being unable to score, especially at home. You gotta score. You gotta be able to keep up with the team when they're coming into Coors Field, especially with how many opportunities they had last night.
I wanted to ask you, as a lifelong Rockies fan, someone who covers the team now, is the offensive output at Coors Field overblown, or should I say, I guess, a player who spends half of his games playing at Coors Field, as soon as he goes to another club, the first thing is, well, don't forget he spent half of his time in Denver hitting. So expect a severe regression. Is that fair?
I don't ever think it's necessary. I think there's maybe a little element of fairness just because it is a hitter-friendly park. I mean, when you look at baseball, there are places that it's easier to hit at, and there's places that it's harder to hit at. But I don't necessarily think it's always as fair as it's especially to look at. I mean, look at what Nolan Arenado's doing right now.
Right.
I know he's been removed from a bit from Coors now with playing the full season with the Cardinals, but he's off to a tear right now. There's other players that have gone. DJ LeMahieu has gone off to be successful. Plenty of players. Dexter Fowler was able to be pretty, contributed to a ton of teams and teams in the playoffs. I mean, I don't think you can't just it's a lazy kind of national narrative, in my opinion, to just summarize Rockies players as Coors. I mean, the fight to get Rockies players in the Hall of Fame, it's always about Coors Field, but you're going to sit there and look at Larry Walker and say Larry Walker is not a Hall of Famer. That's just kind of crazy. I mean,
totally.
And especially my same thing with Todd Helton. However, there are people that benefit from there, and there's a lot of reasons that people come to Colorado to get their offense to be reinvigorated. There is something about, of course, the ball travels. Of course, you have the big gaps. The Coors Field is a hitter's friendly place, but it shouldn't take away from the accomplishments that we see. However, the Coors hangover is real. The Rockies are a team, especially last year, that has struggled on the road, and especially the big, one of those big factors is not scoring runs, the offense going flat. But I don't necessarily think that's always that's a Coors Field type of thing, versus when you look at the roster construction sometimes, and when you look back, there was just players that weren't performing up to snuff. And outside of the Rockies core, when you do look at the supplemental people they've had around the Rockies, you're like, huh? I mean, I know the Cubs, Tony Walters will live in infamy, in Chicago forever. Chicago Cubs fans might look at that guy putting the ball in play, but Tony Walters, was horrendous at the dish
Yeah.
more often than not. He was just able to poke one through the center of the middle of the field at the right time. So I think you can't ignore it, but you can't focus on it, because I think there's so much analytics, there's so much studying, there's so much knowledge in baseball that you can look at players and be like, that's not just a Coors Field product. And I don't think it's necessarily fair when you look at places like, why do Rockies players have to deal with so much, but then people on the Yankees can be treated like deities when right field is a little league right field?
Right.
Anybody can hit it over that thing. I can hit it over there.
You and I could take a couple out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I connect with it enough. I mean, so I just think if you're going to focus solely on Rockies players with the Coors thing, it's kind of lazy in my opinion. I just think you're not diving in fully to players. However, they should be rightfully criticized when they underperform on the road and they underperform offensively, because I think people would be pretty shocked to know the Rockies were a bottom team in home runs most of last season and stayed there. And then, it was kind of more, they were a top team in home runs in this window. They weren't a top team in home runs throughout the entire season. And so there's probably some offensive, people would be shocked to see how bad the Rockies offense has been, especially over the past couple of years with some of the names we've had.
Well, I love what you said about the not so much focusing on the power, and people think it's home run city at Coors Field, which yes, the air is thinner, the ball flies, but with the way that the stadium is configured, the power alleys and the gaps, a good doubles hitter really might benefit more than a guy trying to hit 45 home runs, because the way that ballpark is, and that's really not talked about. It's always power, power, power.
Yeah, it's the big long ball. It's the far. Yeah, if you want to be great at Coors Field, you want to know who's someone you should watch or to really take advantage of a place like Coors Field. Todd Helton. I mean, Todd Helton literally was the perfect Coors Field hitter because yes, great, he had the ability to put the ball over the wall, but you know what? He would extend an at bat to 3-2, and then he'd hit a double, and that would score two people, and then he'd be on second. I mean, it's so important to be a contact hitter, to hit, to do way more than just hit for power. And that's what I think the Rockies were hoping to do, is get some people more to hit the ball in play. And someone like, if Jose Iglesias can get to what he used to be, I know we haven't seen him be as well, but he's had some pretty some great games and some good approaches at the dish. So playing at Coors Field is not about hitting the long ball. It's more so about putting the ball in play. And last night, another prime example of what can happen if you're just making sure that you're able to drive the ball for contact and get things in play. Andrew, we're getting close to the end here, but just you mentioned it at the top of the show. You're an optimist. I wanted to be an optimist. I'm a realist, though. I was very frustrated last year, and I'm very vocal, and I will always be vocal about my frustrations. But the changes the Rockies made, and expanded playoffs, kind of, when you look at it, is there a path for the Cubs, if everything goes right, to kind of maybe be in the mix for that wild card at the end of the year?
I mean, if you say no, you're doing yourself an injustice as a fan, right? I mean, I don't have my head up, someone else's behind. I know that this is not supposed to be the year of the Cub, right? Or the Rockies for that matter. But isn't there always that one team that kind of like surprises everybody every year? Look at the Giants last year. They outperformed their preseason win projection total by like 24 games with a bunch
The Nationals won the World Series.
I mean, guys they kind of just pulled from everywhere, and so you never know. I think they have a nice mix of vets. They have a nice core group of younger players now that they've been able to bring back in from trading the core away last year. I like David Ross a lot in the dugout as skipper of this club. I was a huge fan of him as a player. I loved him as a broadcaster. I think he does a wonderful job in the dugout. I was thrilled that they extended him shortly after the lockout was lifted. I think he's the right guy for the job. I don't think he has anything to prove. And for his sake, I hope things turn more quickly than we all expect, because I'd like to see him around for a long time.
Yeah, and the same thing with I like Bud Black. I think he's been someone who's been a great add to the Rockies. I don't necessarily think that if they went out and got a new manager after the lockout, or after Bud Black moved on, that's going to be the thing that helps the Rockies. I think having someone like Bud Black to be there that's seen the good Rockies baseball to kind of help and bring it back and bring it through. But Cubs Rockies all this weekend long. It's going to be another great series tonight. The Rockies certainly have a big task at hand, because Marcus Stroman has been very good against Colorado. I believe he has his lowest ERA against a team is against Colorado, and I believe that includes starts both on the road and at home. Andrew, to close out the podcast, what are you looking for the rest of the series?
I'd take a 2-2 split and run the hell out of town as fast as I could. I mean, I know they got game one, which is great. You got a big 4-gamer, but like you said, both these teams seemingly, early on at least, on the upswing. Nice pitching matchup tonight for sure. Hell, when you're not expected to win, if you could play 500 ball on the road, I'll take it all day long.
500 ball is what you're hoping for. And I mean, I think the big thing to watch, I think tonight's the best game of the series, because Stroman Marquez is going to be wonderful to watch, to see those two go head to head tonight. And we will be talking about all things that throughout next week and everything. But Andrew, where can people go to stay up to date with all things you and Locked On Cubs?
Yeah, we try to have fun on Twitter at Chicago Cubs PA, and then for the show at Locked On Cubs, like you were talking about with YouTube, have the Locked On Cubs YouTube page up for the last few months, which has been cool as well. So really, really had fun talking ball with you. I'd like to do it again. I wish Cubs Rockies met more often, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know. I do too, but it's always, you can always count on it. It's always exciting. And as much as I don't like seeing a stadium full of opposition colors, I do appreciate the fact that people go out and support their team when they're in Colorado, and it's always a ton of fun. But Andrew, again, thank you so much for the time and the insight on the Cubs. For you Cubs fans out there, I'm Paul Holden. I'm at Paul Holden 33 on Twitter. I keep most of the Rocky stuff to the Locked On Rockies Twitter. Well, I still talk about Rockies on mine, but I do some other stuff. But LO Rockies on Twitter. And yeah, that subscribe on YouTube is major for us on the Locked On Podcast Network. So if you like the podcast, please go subscribe to Locked On Cubs and Locked On Rockies. It is a big help to us. And after this podcast, why don't you go check out the Locked On Now or the Locked On MLB podcast, where you can get more inside looks to all things baseball, all things professional sports, and stay up to date with all your other favorite Locked On podcasts as well, because we are proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And until next time, this is Paul Holden for Andrew Belleson saying thank you for listening to the Locked On Podcast Network.